Fellowship Farm. Book 18, Fitzgeralds at Sea. In the 18th book of the Fellowship Farm series, Leezah, Skye-Maree and Olingah spend time with their uncle on his boat. An underwater encounter makes them fear for their lives. A town surprises them with its enormous flowers, and they try some very unusual ice cream. At the end of their adventure, they sadly wave goodbye to their uncle, who returns to his home. There is also another important Fellowship Farm farewell at the end of Fitzgeralds at Sea. Chapter 1, Bombs at Sea. Though the light spring sunshine shone on the Fitzgerald children as they stood on the old cement boat ramp, watching their uncle back the boat into the sea, the air was cool. The children wore warm coats, squished under their faded orange life vests, woolly hats, scarves and thick woolen socks in their gumboots. However, even if they were naked, they would not have noticed the cold as they were bursting with excitement about going out on their uncle's boat. Back at Fellowship Farm, their parents were working hard to make the farmhouse livable again after the recent flood. Leezah, Skye-Maree and Olingah were very grateful for the work their parents were doing. Scrubbing, fixing, painting and shopping. They were also very grateful that their parents had agreed for the children to have a break for a couple of days and go out on the sea with their uncle. Uncle Jack very skillfully reversed down the boat ramp. The boat was on a trailer, and as the trailer rolled further down the ramp and into the sea, the boat started to rise and float on the water. The sea was calm, and the water lapped gently at the shore. Uncle Jack untied the boat and pushed it right away from the trailer. He passed the rope to the 3 children to hold. He then drove the truck and the trailer forward, out of the water and back up the ramp. While Uncle Jack parked the car on the large patch of dirt at the top of the boat ramp, which served as a car park, the children clung to the rope, ensuring the boat did not float out to sea. Uncle Jack came stomping down the boat ramp in his huge, dirty white gumboots. Under his hairy beard, he was grinning from ear to ear. He loved his nieces and nephew very deeply, and now that his own children were grown up, he particularly enjoyed spending time with them. He could see the excitement in their bright eyes and smiling faces, and in the diligence and unity with which they attended to their responsibility. Uncle Jack took the rope from the children and pulled the boat as close to the shore as it was safe to do so. The children helped each other clamber over the side and into the boat. Uncle Jack climbed in after them and dropped the rope onto the floor. The boat started to drift away from the shore, and when it was deep enough, Uncle Jack started the motor. The boat gently pulled away from the ramp and out toward the open sea. There was a sort of windscreen at the front, which protected the driver from the spray and wind when the boat was going quickly. There was plenty of room for everyone to sit comfortably at the back. Uncle Jack had stowed food, clothes, camping gear and fishing gear in the space at the front, which was covered with a fiberglass cover. Out at sea, in the direction they were heading, there was a big flock of seagulls diving for fish. They were flying a few meters above the water and dive-bombing into it, one after the other after the other. Every second there was a splash, and another seagull turned downward, folded its wings, and shot into the water. A bird would then quickly emerge and fly up into the sky again. Sometimes A seagull emerged with a fish in its beak, and sometimes the beak was empty. But the gulls never stopped. Over and over and over again. It was entrancing to watch their grace and perseverance. And as the boat picked up speed, the children rejoiced at the wind on their faces, the clear blue water rushing past the side of the boat, and their uncle, standing at the steering wheel, loudly singing the Hallelujah chorus. Chapter 2, Captains at Sea. When the boat was out of the bay, Uncle Jack turned it to the east. The sun shone brightly on the water, dazzling the children's eyes. Uncle Jack was already wearing his sunglasses. They had leather flaps around them and covered every part of his eyes. No sunlight could sneak in the side or the bottom. He looked like an old-fashioned pilot. Uncle Jack shouted to Leezah to pull up the seat she was sitting on. Leezah stood with her feet apart so as to not lose her balance. She pulled the seat up. It opened on hinges, like the lid of a box. This was the place where Uncle Jack stored the life jackets, a first aid kit, and other handy things. There was an old ice cream container full of old sunglasses of various shapes and sizes. Leezah pulled out the ice cream bucket and offered it to Olingah and Skye-Maree. Olingah took a pair of sunglasses made of green plastic in the shape of hearts. They used to belong to his cousin Clara, Uncle Jack's daughter, who was now serving at the Baha'i World Centre in Israel. Skye-Maree chose some cool dark shades, and Leezah chose a pair of round glasses with a red plastic rim. It was much easier to look at the sea with the glasses protecting their eyes from the glare of the sun. Out at sea, the wind picked up a little, making some little waves for the boat to splash through and over. Little bits of spray, caught in the breeze, blew back onto the children. Every now and then, there was a particularly big splash, and someone would get quite a shower. Whether the splashes fell on him or on his sisters, they made Olingah laugh so hard he nearly fell off the seat. "Do you want to have a turn at steering?" Uncle Jack called back. Did they ever? The three stood up carefully so as to keep their balance on the rocking boat. They moved to the front just behind the windscreen. "Who's going first?" Uncle Jack added. The children looked at each other. There were a few different thoughts going through their heads. Each of them wanted to try steering the boat. Each of them was also a bit worried about making a mistake and maybe causing an accident. Each of them wanted to be generous and not selfish, so they didn't want to go first if someone else wanted to go first. All these thoughts turned into a muddle in their heads, and no one knew what to say. "Right, oldest to youngest," said Uncle Jack with a big grin. Leezah, step right up." Leezah stood between her uncle and the steering wheel. For a few seconds, they both had their hands on the wheel. Then Uncle Jack let go and stepped back a little. Leezah was steering the boat. "See that island off in the distance, due east?" Uncle Jack asked. "Head toward that. That's where we will have our lunch." Leezah nodded. It was really quite easy. Leezah soon felt very comfortable at the wheel. She looked straight ahead and forgot about the other people on the boat. In her imagination, she became a captain of a big boat off on a grand adventure. She imagined driving the boat for days and nights on end, through storms with waves as high as houses. Nothing would be able to topple Captain Leezah's boat. She started to pretend that she had to navigate a tricky stretch of water with crocodiles and sharks, whales, rocks, and the occasional island. She turned the steering wheel to the left to avoid a whale and then to the right to avoid a big shark. She was completely lost in her imaginary world until suddenly Skye-Maree yelled, "Hey, what are you doing, swerving all over the place?" Chapter 3, Paradise. Leezah was jolted back to reality. Her uncle's boat on the clear open sea. "Whoops," she giggled. "Your turn, Skye-Maree." Skye-Maree stepped in between Leezah and the wheel. She took hold of it, and Leezah let go and stepped back. Leezah sat back down at the back of the boat and went back to her daydream. When it was Olingah's turn to steer, Uncle Jack pushed a crate over to the wheel for him to stand on. Olingah was too short to see over the front without a crate. After each of them had had a turn, Uncle Jack went back to steering. They were starting to get close to the island where Uncle Jack planned to have lunch. From a speck on the horizon, the island gradually became bigger and clearer. Soon, it loomed large in front of them, and they seemed to be racing toward it. Uncle Jack slowed the boat and pulled into a beautiful bay with white sand and crystal clear water. The children could see the sandy bottom as clearly as if there was no water at all. Uncle Jack let the boat glide as close to the beach as possible without hitting the bottom. Then he dropped the anchor. The bay was on the southern side of the island and sheltered from the sea breezes. Out of the wind, and now in the middle of the day, the spring sunshine was warm on their backs. There was no way to get to the beach without getting wet, so the children took off all their clothes except their swimmers. Uncle Jack was tall enough to walk from the boat to the beach without getting wet above his waist, so he left his shirt on but took his trousers off. Underneath his trousers were his big, bright green and black spotted swimming shorts. Skye-Maree was the first to jump off the side of the boat into the sparkling water, with an enormous splash. Olingah followed quickly after her, and soon after Olingah there was a third splash as Leezah leaped with joy into the sea. Uncle Jack slithered into the water and waded to the shore. He carried the bag of lunch supplies on his head to stop it getting wet. The children were in no rush to get to the shore. They swam to the sandy bottom and pushed off, bursting through the surface of the water. They played swimming tip. Then they swam over to the rocky outcrop at the end of the beach. They swam along the side of the rocks, watching the thick seaweed waving in the currents. Through the clear water, they could see schools of small bright blue fish, larger yellow striped fish, and an occasional very large brown fish. There were starfish on the rocks, red, orange, pink, and yellow. Even without goggles, they could see a wonderful underwater world. The fish didn't seem to be afraid of the children floating around in their home. At times, they could get very close, almost close enough to touch. The children each found a good rock to hold on to. They gripped their rocks and let the pull of the water going into the beach and back out to sea pull their bodies to and fro. As the currents gently tugged on their bodies, a group of jellyfish drifted past. They looked like elegant ghosts. Suddenly, Olingah saw something that made him freeze. He then let go of his rock and swam quickly over to his sister. He tapped Leezah on her arm so that she lifted her head above the water for longer than it took to take a quick breath of air. "What is it, Ollie?" she asked, puffing, looking at his wide eyes and feeling his nails digging into her skin. Olingah pointed. Chapter 4: Lives at Risk. There were 2 large stingrays moving through the water. They were about the same size as Olingah. Their wings moved them gracefully through the water, but on the end of their long tails there were large spikes. Leezah stuck out her leg to kick Skye-Maree and pointed to the rays. Skye-Maree let out an underwater scream and in the process gulped in a lungful of salty water. Coughing and spluttering, she clambered out of the water and up the rocks. Leezah and Olingah followed, slipping and sliding on the thick seaweed. The stingrays glided past the exact spot the children had been only moments before. When they were all completely out of the water, they turned their attention to Skye-Maree's spluttering. She spat seawater onto the rocks and gasped and choked and coughed, until finally all the water was out of her lungs. "That was scary," said Olingah. "Did you see that big spike on its tail?" asked Leezah. "It was like a dagger." Skye-Maree nodded gravely. They all felt they had just escaped with their lives. They hoped Uncle Jack would not be too shocked when they told him their tale. They slowly made their way back over the rocks to the end of the beach, supporting each other all the way. They walked along the white sandy beach to the place where Uncle Jack had prepared a large fire. The beach was covered in pretty curly shells, but the children barely noticed them. Uncle Jack threw a large piece of wood onto the flames and looked up as they arrived. Their arms were wrapped around each other and their faces were pale. "You 3 look like you've seen a ghost," he exclaimed. "Did you find treasure or mermaids or something over by the rocks?" "No," said Leezah solemnly as they all sat themselves down by the fire. "Now, don't be worried, Uncle Jack. We are all okay," she continued. This made Uncle Jack feel and look worried. "But we nearly got killed by 2 giant stingrays." This made Uncle Jack feel a lot less worried, but he tried to keep looking worried. "Please tell me more," he requested. Olingah explained everything that had happened. Just as Olingah finished telling his uncle the story of the stingrays, Olingah thought of something. What if the shock of the story gave his uncle a heart attack? Olingah didn't know how old Uncle Jack was, but he seemed pretty old. Maybe 100 years old? And Olingah had heard that old people can have heart attacks when they get shocks. If Uncle Jack had a heart attack on the island, what would they do? How would they help him? How would they get home? How would they start the boat? How would they find their way back to the boat ramp? How would they drive the car to Fellowship Farm? Olingah was close to tears and starting to feel some panic. He looked up at his uncle. Uncle Jack was smiling warmly at his nieces and nephew. He started breaking some more sticks and adding them to the fire. He didn't appear to be feeling sharp pains in his heart. "I think you all made a wise choice to get out of the water when you felt afraid." The children nodded. They were relieved he didn't seem upset. "And thank you for telling me everything that happened." After a pause, Uncle Jack added something that surprised the children. "You know, stingrays are not really dangerous. They would never attack you. They are actually curious and playful. If they get scared, they usually just swim away. Only if you step on them in the sand or make them feel trapped will they use their stinger." "Really?" asked Skye-Maree. "Really. In fact, some people think it brings 7 years of good luck to kiss a stingray. They are really just like puppies of the sea." Skye-Maree's mouth gaped open. Olingah didn't blink for at least 30 seconds. Leezah started to giggle. Chapter 5 Chocolate Bananas. Eventually, when Skye-Maree closed her mouth and Olingah started blinking again, and Leezah stopped giggling, they all realised they were absolutely starving. The early start, boat ride, sea air, swim and shock of encountering the stingrays had used up every last bit of food in their tummies. They hurried to the water's edge to wash the sand off their hands. When they came back to the fire, Uncle Jack passed them each a salad sandwich, then another, then another, then an apple, and then it was chocolate banana time. Each of them took a banana out of the bag and made a slit down the middle with Uncle Jack's pocket knife. The slit went through the top layer of skin and the banana. The children stuffed the slit in the banana full of chocolate and wrapped the stuffed banana in aluminium foil. The foil-covered bananas were dropped in the hot coals of the fire. While they waited for the banana to cook, Uncle Jack did what he loved best, read a book, and the children did what they loved best, built a huge sandcastle. They piled up a huge mound of sand, patting it down firmly as they went. Then they dug tunnels from one side of the castle through to the other. Leezah stuck her hand in one side and touched fingers with Olingah, who stuck his hand in the other. They covered their sandcastle with shells and found a stick with a leaf to serve as a flag. When the castle was finished, they rinsed their hands and went to check on their bananas. With sticks, they pulled them from their coals. The foil was very hot. They gradually and carefully pulled it open to let out some of the heat. Inside the foil, the chocolate had completely melted, and the banana had turned to hot mush. They dipped their fingers in the hot, sweet goo and licked them. It tasted delicious. The chocolate bananas took a long time to eat as they were very hot. As they ate, Skye-Maree asked, "What's this island called, Uncle Jack?" "We could call it the Isle of Skye," suggested Uncle Jack with a twinkle. "There's already an island called Skye. It's in Scotland," replied Skye-Maree. "And that reminds me, we still haven't heard the story about Colby. Remember Dad said there was a Baha'i called Colby? Like the man at the shelter from the island of Skye. We never heard the story about the Baha'i Colby." "You mean Howard Colby Ives? He was a very special person. An angel. Abdu'l-Baha really loved him a lot, as did Shoghi Effendi." "Can you tell us about Howard Colby Ives?" "When you get a little bit older, you must read a book called Portals to Freedom. It is one of the best books in the world," Uncle Jack advised. Then he went on, thoughtfully. "Do you remember the prayer that you say for teaching, that says God's power can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns?" Leezah knew the prayer. She nodded. "Well, before Howard Colby Ives met Abdu'l-Baha, he was like a gnat. And after he met Abdu'l-Baha, he was like an eagle." "What's a gnat, Uncle Jack?" asked Olingah. "It's an insect, Ollie," replied Leezah. "So before he met Abdu'l-Baha, he was weak and helpless. And after he met Abdu'l-Baha, he was spiritually strong and could soar high in the spiritual sky." "Yes, Leezah," smiled Uncle Jack. "After he became a Baha'i, he studied the writings for years and years without stopping. There were several years in a row where Howard Colby Ives didn't read any books except the Baha'i writings. He just kept reading them until the words of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha were in his blood." "In his blood?" asked Olingah. Yes, I mean his every thought, word and action was guided by the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He was completely selfless. All he thought about was how to serve the faith. So I guess he never fought with his sisters? Asked Olingah, thinking about what would happen if all his thoughts, words and actions were guided by the teachings of Baha'u'llah. I guess not, agreed Uncle Jack. Chapter 6, Giant Sunflowers. After about 20 minutes of poking, dipping, sucking and scraping, there were 3 tummies very full of hot, sweet goo, and 3 empty banana skins turning brown on the embers of the fire. Well, my dears, said Uncle Jack, when the last ball of sticky aluminium foil had been put back in the lunch bag. Shall we board our cruise ship and head for our next destination? Everyone agreed. Olingah helped Uncle Jack throw sand on the fire to make sure it was completely out. Uncle Jack picked up the almost empty lunch bag and they all headed into the water and out to the boat. The children were not keen to put their feet on the sand under the water, in case there was a stingray resting there. But they were not afraid to swim out to the boat, as they now knew a swimming stingray wouldn't bother them. In fact, if they saw one, they might try to kiss it and get 7 years of good luck. Uncle Jack climbed in first, heaving his huge body into the boat. He then reached over and helped the children in. Uncle Jack pulled up the anchor and started the engine. They cruised slowly out of the bay to the open sea. They continued to head east. The sun was behind them now, and it felt warm on their backs, even though the wind from the moving boat was fresh. The boat bumped along on the small waves of the sea for about 2 hours. Leezah felt she would never tire of the soothing motion of the boat on the water. It was so beautiful to have nothing but sky above them and water all around them. They followed the coast around the northeastern point of Tasmania. In the late afternoon, Uncle Jack brought the boat into the shore. He pulled up at a small jetty and looped the boat's rope around one of the posts. There was a ladder from the boat to the top of the jetty. The children climbed up the ladder. Uncle Jack passed them the bags of clothes and followed after them. The jetty was made of wood. It was bleached grey, almost white by the sun, salt and wind. The jetty looked like it had been there for a long time. Every now and then there was a piece of wood that looked much newer than the rest, where a piece of the jetty had been replaced. It felt funny to walk on the stationary jetty after being in the rocking boat most of the day. At the end of the jetty was a sign. Welcome to Ivyton, sunflower capital of Australia. As the family walked through the town, they noticed that there were sunflowers everywhere. In people's gardens, in parks, on the side of the roads. It was like a wonderland filled with tall yellow flowers. Leezah, Skye-Maree and Olingah ran ahead of their uncle, trying to find ever bigger sunflowers. The tallest one they found was twice as tall as Leezah. Uncle Jack led them from the jetty, through the town, to a large house painted bright yellow. Covering the whole front of the building was the image of a giant sunflower. The yellow sign out the front said, Ivyton Backpackers. The family went inside. They were greeted by a young woman who welcomed them in a warm sing-song voice. Hi there! Welcome to Ivyton Backpackers. My name is Phoebe Emily. How can I help you? Uncle Jack explained that he had booked a room for 4 under the name Mr. Olingah Fitzgerald. Olingah grinned. Phoebe Emily checked a big book and then reached behind herself and pulled out a key off a hook. "Number 13, she said, reading the tag. "Ooh, I hope you're not superstitious," she added with raised eyebrows. "We are not superstitious," smiled Uncle Jack warmly. "We are Baha'is." "Oh, I had a Baha'i friend at school. She was lovely. Her name was Chrissy. Do you know her?" 1 hour of conversation later, the family left the reception of the Ivyton backpackers and headed up the carpeted stairs to room 13. Chapter 7. The Opposite of Burnt Tongue. The room was simple but clean. There were 4 single beds with 4 warm doonas. Next to each bed was a bedside table, and on each table there was a reading lamp. The showers and toilets were across the hall and were shared with other people staying at the hostel. They were just as simple, but not quite as clean. It was a great treat to have a long, hot shower after several days of quick showers in the barn. They had showered once in the caravan, which was better than showering in the barn, but it still had a small hot water tank and they had to be very quick. The other great thing about the hostel showers was there were 5 shower cubicles for women and 5 for men, so no one had to wait. They all had long, hot showers at the same time and returned to the bedroom in clean clothes, with damp hair and red cheeks. Uncle Jack led them downstairs and out onto the street. As they wandered through the town looking for a place to have dinner, they came across little carts where people were selling hot roasted sunflower seeds. They were served in squares of paper folded to make a kind of cup. When Uncle Jack offered to buy a cupful for each of them, the children accepted with much gratitude and enthusiasm. The hot, salty seeds were absolutely delicious. Further down the street, there was a fish and chips shop. Skye-Maree's eyes lit up. Fish and chips was a very, very special treat for the Fitzgerald family, and it was one of Skye-Maree's favourite dinners. It didn't take long for everyone to agree to have fish and chips for dinner. While they waited for their food to cook, the family went into the small supermarket next door to buy a big bottle of juice and some paper cups. They planned to drink it with their dinner, but everyone was so thirsty that by the time the fish and chips were cooked, the juice was already finished. Leezah had the happy job of carrying the steaming parcel of fish and chips as they walked down to the jetty. At the park near the jetty, Olingah filled up the empty juice bottle with water at a tap. Under the tap was a ceramic bowl full of water, and next to the bowl was a hand-painted sign. It said, "For dogs, and short people with low standards." As they reached the jetty, the sky was starting to turn from bright blue to a golden colour with hints of red. Leezah put the parcel on the floor of the jetty, and the children gathered around. Luckily for Uncle Jack, there was an old wooden bench on the end of the jetty, so he didn't need to sit on the ground. Sitting on the ground was difficult for Uncle Jack. As the meal was wrapped in several layers of paper, Skye-Maree pulled one layer of paper out from under the parcel and filled it with fish and chips. She put it next to Uncle Jack on the bench. "Ah, thank you for your consideration," Uncle Jack murmured as he stretched his back and legs. The chips were hot to touch and very hot in their mouths. None of the children could resist trying to eat the salty, steaming strips of potato, however. One chip was wasted when Olingah burnt his tongue and spat the chip back out. He quickly poured a cup of water and took a big sip. He could feel some blisters forming where the hot oil had touched the inside of his mouth. "What's the opposite of a burnt tongue?" asked Uncle Jack. "The opposite of a burnt tongue?" replied Leezah. "Is it unburnt tongue?" Uncle Jack shook his head. "It's patience." Chapter 8. Vanilla-sunflower-seed-flavoured ice cream. When even the last and tiniest burnt chip had been gobbled up, the greasy paper with hints of leftover tomato sauce was scrunched up and dropped into a bin at the park end of the jetty. The children gulped down several cups of water. The final treat for the evening was still ahead of them. On their way back to the hostel, the family passed an ice cream shop. The children were so full of gratitude for their wonderful day, as well as the fish and chip dinner, that it didn't even occur to them to ask for a single thing more. But Uncle Jack led them up the steps and into the shop. There was an array of the usual flavours, and one rather unusual flavour. It was called the eighteenth Special, and it was vanilla-sunflower-seed-flavoured ice cream. "Who is feeling courageous enough to try something new?" asked Uncle Jack. "Me!" Leezah and Skye-Maree answered at once. Olingah wasn't so sure. "What's the something new?" he asked cautiously. "Vanilla-sunflower-seed-flavoured ice cream," said Uncle Jack. Olingah looked unsure. Chocolate ice cream sounded like a better idea. "Once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, sunshine," grinned Jack. Olingah shook his head. "Chocolate, please." "Okay, so 1 chocolate and 3 eighteenth Specials." Everyone nodded. "Thank you, Uncle Jack." A minute later, each Fitzgerald was holding a cone wrapped in a napkin with a very generous serve of ice cream on top. The ice cream felt good on Olingah's burnt tongue, which was still sore. The sunflower seeds, which were scattered through the eighteenth Specials, were coated in a layer of caramel and were delicious. Olingah had a lick of Uncle Jack's, so he got a chance to taste sunflower seed ice cream. He realized it was delicious, but he was also happy with his choice. They wandered slowly along the road, licking their dessert as the sun finished setting. They were happy to arrive at the hostel, and it was with tired legs they climbed the staircase of the old house. Uncle Jack unlocked the door of room 13. As they gathered their toothbrushes and pajamas, Skye-Maree asked, "Why did Phoebe Emily ask us if we're superstitious when she gave us the key to room 13? What's wrong with the number 13? "There's absolutely nothing wrong with the number 13. It's a perfectly fine number," replied Uncle Jack. "Why do people think it's unlucky?" The reason for that is that Jesus originally had 12 disciples. So together with Jesus, they were 13. But one of the disciples, whose name was Judas, became a covenant breaker, just like Baha'u'llah's half-brother Mirza Yahya. He betrayed Jesus, and he was the 13th person to join the Last Supper, which was a special dinner just before Jesus was crucified. So that is why some people think 13 is unlucky. Uncle Jack then added, "Sometimes when people build buildings, they don't build a 13th floor. There's a 12th floor and then a 14th floor, because they think a 13th floor would be unlucky. That is a superstition." The children went to the bathrooms to get ready for bed. When they had all gathered back at the bedroom, each one of them gave their uncle a big hug and thanked him for a wonderful day. They then sat reverently on their beds and offered prayers, saying thank you to God for a wonderful day. As soon as prayers were finished, each one turned off the little lamp on their bedside table, snuggled under the toasty warm doona, and fell straight to sleep. Uncle Jack propped himself up and settled into reading some more of God Passes By, until he too turned out his lamp, whispered Ya Bahola Pa, and fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 9, Reflection on Fishing. By the time the sun rose, the Fitzgerald children and their uncle were already on their way to the jetty, with tummies full of breakfast and souls full of prayers. There were a few others at the jetty early as well, mostly people heading out fishing. Uncle Jack greeted each person warmly, though they were strangers to him.
"What are we doing today, Uncle Jack?"
asked Olingah. "Well, I thought we'd head out to the sea and do a bit of fishing, and then head back to Choppy's Point by the end of the day."
"Okay,"
said Olingah. But his face took on a little worried frown as he put his life jacket on and took a seat. Uncle Jack unlooped the rope and started the engine. The boat chugged slowly away from the jetty and across the bay. When they were out at sea, Uncle Jack sped up, and soon they were once again racing across the little waves. They continued for about 2 hours, back in the direction from which they had come yesterday. Then Uncle Jack gradually slowed the boat, until eventually he brought it to a complete stop and turned off the engine. "Who wants to catch some fish?" he cried. But his voice was muffled because he was reaching under the bow of the boat for the fishing gear.
"Me,"
replied his nieces. Once again, Olingah wasn't so sure. Uncle Jack brought out a little esky with some bits of fish in it. He also had a reel of fishing line wrapped around a bright-coloured plastic ring for each of the children. On the end of each line was a hook. Their uncle showed the children how to push the bait onto the fish hook without hurting their fingers. The girls picked up the hooks and started putting the bait on. Olingah hung back. It wasn't until after Leezah had finished putting the bait on her hook that she realized tears were streaming down his face. She put her hook and bait down carefully and turned to Olingah.
"What's the matter, Ollie? Are you scared of touching the hook?"
Olingah shook his head.
"What happens when we hang the hook over the side of the boat, Uncle Jack?"
he asked. "Well, if we're lucky, a big fish thinks, 'Yum,' and bites on our bait, and then we bring it home for dinner at Fellowship Farm."
"But biting on the hook will hurt the fish,"
cried Olingah.
"And keeping it out of the water will make it suffer and struggle."
Olingah let out a sob.
"That's not kind. I wouldn't like to bite a hook or be held underwater."
Tears were flowing in streams down Olingah's face now, and it was hard for him to speak. Everyone stopped what they were doing and listened to Olingah. After a pause, Skye-Maree said,
"You're right, Ollie. Perhaps we better not try catch any fish."
Uncle Jack gave his nephew a big bear hug. "I honour your compassion, Olingah Gayatri William Fitzgerald." Then in a booming voice, Uncle Jack said, "Absolutely no fishing allowed. Whose silly idea was this anyway? Killing innocent fish. Put those hooks and bait away, girls, and don't let me ever catch you near them again."
"Yes, Uncle Jack,"
giggled the girls. When the fishing gear had been put away, Uncle Jack tipped the bait into the sea, calling out to the fish, saying, "Free food, fellas." He started the engine and they continued on their way. They had not travelled far when something very special happened. It was something that Leezah, Skye-Maree and Olingah would not forget their whole life long. Chapter 10, Dolphin Delight. The sun was bright and the sky cloudless. The sea water was very clean and clear. The children gazed into the water as the boat zipped across the surface. Suddenly, on both sides of the little boat, underneath the water, as well as dipping and diving across the surface, a pod of dolphins appeared. They were grey on top and white underneath, with a little grey fin on their backs and 2 flippers at the front of their bodies. They looked as though they were constantly smiling as they gracefully swam and dived in the wake of the little boat. Leaning over the side of the boat, it was sometimes possible to touch them. They were so close. The children let out squeals of delight. They had never been so close to dolphins in the wild before.
"Can we get into the water with them, Uncle Jack?"
cried Skye-Maree. Uncle Jack nodded. He reduced the speed of the boat. "I don't know if they will stay near us if the boat stops moving, but we can try." Eventually the boat came to a stop. For a minute, the dolphins seemed to have moved on, but then they reappeared close to the boat again. The children hurried to take off their clothes. Uncle Jack pulled some snorkels and goggles from under the seat and handed them to the children. The children adjusted the straps, washed the masks and slid them on, before slipping over the side of the boat and into the water. The first surprise was how big the dolphins were when the children were actually in the water with them. They suddenly seemed huge and powerful. It felt like a dolphin could accidentally knock them out with a swish of its tail. Especially for Olingah, the littlest, it was rather scary, and at first it took his breath away and made him cling to the boat. The second surprise was how friendly and curious they were. The dolphins stayed nearby for a long time, swimming near the children, diving in and out of the water. They seemed so playful, chasing each other through the water. The children grew bolder and bolder and tried to swim after the dolphins and touch them as they swam past. After some time, however, the pod of dolphins made a few last circles of the boat before heading out to sea. The children waited in the water, hoping they would return. When they didn't come back, the children climbed back into the boat with the help of their uncle. They felt exhilarated. They talked about their experiences all the way home to Fellowship Farm. And as they spoke, the stories became more and more interesting and less related to reality. By the time the family returned from the sea and pulled up at Fellowship Farm, the children were absolutely bursting to tell their parents about swimming with the dolphins. When they arrived at the caravan, they were just in time for dinner. Rummy and Flip provided a feast of quiche and salad, and were given a feast of stories about dolphins, followed by stories of seagulls, stingrays, islands, fires, sunflowers, fish and chips, and special ice cream. Rummy and Flip also shared the great progress they had made on the house. They had also heard from the school that classes for Kellyton primary students were going to be held at Limedale High School for the next few weeks, so that they didn't miss too much school while the buildings were being repaired. It was a wonderful dinner filled with much joy. However, after dinner came a sad moment. It was time for Uncle Jack to go back to Hobart. He had supported the Fitzgerald family in their time of crisis, but now things were getting back to normal. He needed to return to work. He gave each of his beloved family members a big hug before heading out to the truck. Just before he left, he wound the window down and said, I will send you a wonderful and hilarious book to read when I get back to Hobart, so look out for it in the post."
"Thank you, Uncle Jack,"
cried the children, full and overflowing with love, and with tears streaming down their faces. A week later, a parcel arrived in the post. It was a book by William Sears called God Loves Laughter. The Fitzgeralds of Fellowship Farm read some each day and laughed so hard their tummy muscles hurt. And now is a good time for you to get a copy of that book as well, because this is the very last book in the Fellowship Farm series. The end.